Why is it that fantasy is more alluring than reality? Today we're going to explore this as it pertains to the experience of limerence. If you're not familiar with this term limerence, an easy way to understand it is a person addiction. This person that is the center of the fantasy, the literature calls the limerent object. We're going to call them LO for short. It is important to make the distinction that limerence is very different than just the early stages of a new romantic relationship. It's a chronic infatuation and an obsession with the other. It can be very debilitating. We're going to explore the inner workings of those of you who are perhaps more prone to limerence. We're going to explore this through a psychoanalytical lens of object relations theory. Before we get started, subscribe, hit the bell, and get notifications to stay up to date on the latest research of limerence. I'm going to be talking about in my later videos the 3 main research papers and current findings on this experience. This is only for educational purposes and sometimes entertainment. Your experience might be different than mine and may be different from what I'm describing. And if it is, I encourage you to weigh in on this video. What do you think it is that makes people prone to limerence? Let's first start with thinking about what is the function of fantasy. Fantasy serves as a psychological mechanism to protect from the external reality by retreating into our internal landscape. I would add that fantasy, as elaborate as these love stories and these longings go, also serves to manage our natural and universal human experience of existential anxiety and loneliness, but also our personal and internal conflicts, our unmet needs, and anxieties arising from early relationships. Object relations theory puts forward that our adult relationships are highly influenced by our early objects, or in other words, a person to which we are relating to. That would essentially be our caregivers or our parents. We internalize these objects and they become representations for the persons that we relate to externally. In the case of limerent objects, or LO, this is the object of affection and of addiction. In the case of limerence and any type of addiction, there is always an element of mental escape. And much like object relations theory, the process of attachment to this LO or to whatever addiction you have is unconscious. In the literature, they refer to this unconscious process as the glimmer. This is a romanticized meeting of the LO. It happens in a single moment where you fixate on this person, and then all at once, your mind creates an elaborate fantasy on this meeting. It takes over the mind and becomes a craving. And this is why it's distinctly a person addiction, because it impacts the dopamine reward circuits in the brain, much like any behavioral addiction. My personal experience with limerence and the meeting of this LO is not unique. Much like anyone else's on the forums, there's a very distinct before and after. Meeting them is kind of like jumping into cold water. It's like a shock to the system. Suddenly, the LO serves as a way to add vibrancy to your life, to sometimes what feels like an often boring and dull existence until meeting them. It wakes you up. And wakes you up from what exactly? We'll come back to that question. But first, I want to talk about object constancy as it relates to healthy development of relating to others and the psychological and emotional well-being of an adult. 2 things are critical during infancy when developing object constancy. 1 is that when mom and dad leave, we develop an understanding that the objects, the persons, mom and dad, do not change just because they are out of sight. 2, we also develop a sense of security that when they leave, they will return. Now, when object constancy is not properly developed during infancy, someone will grow up to be prone to separation anxiety, and develop the fear of abandonment. Now, anyone who's ever experienced limerence knows that there is this insatiable longing for the LO's unrequited love, and it becomes a roller coaster of unpredictable wanting, of emotions, of separation anxiety, of craving their attention. This is in alignment with object relations theory, which suggests that our early attachments to the LO mirrors the unconscious internalized objects or the persons from our infancy. The parent or the caregiver's love was never returned. And this is why those with limerence always have some sort of insecure attachment style. Now let's go back to that question of what is it that limerent fantasies wake us up from? Limerent experiences are not by accident. And I don't even mean to tease that it's fated or that it was written in the stars, but rather that those who are prone to limerence are those who are asleep to their needs for emotional connection and intimacy. And what better way to wake your brain up than by hijacking your desire for closeness with someone who is unavailable? That's why many LOs are coworkers, people who are already married, people who are recently divorced and who are emotionally unavailable, and maybe you're already married. It's a very cruel occurrence, but it's by design. The deeper the longing, the stronger the pull. More on this in my next video about wish fulfillment and repetition compulsion, which are other psychoanalytic terminologies to describe what might be happening with somebody with limerence. Now, going back to object relations theory, fantasies help us to internalize the person and our early caregivers and our experiences. This helps us create a stable sense of self, stable relationships, and it also suggests that when we are able to properly internalize these objects, it influences the way that we later feel, perceive, and behave in our adult relationships. And I suppose that also includes what we project onto the LO. Because the internal object greatly impacts our relationship with the person it represents, and because of those abandonment and attachment traumas, you can see how someone might distort the image and attachment to the LO. Limerence is an altered mental state, therefore we do not see LO accurately. I theorize that people who are prone to limerence are people who not only did not fully develop object constancy and who have insecure attachment styles, but they're also people who are using fantasy as their primary coping mechanism to connect with their early caregivers and who never fully developed an integrated way of relating to the external object. Fantasy can be innocent and even protective, but it can also be like any coping mechanism. It can take a life of its own, and when it becomes this ritual of connecting to these figments of imagination, it's reinforced and then it is strengthened to become an addiction, it catches up. When they have added a sense of novelty and aliveness to our life, what could be so bad about that? Well, in these fantasies of LO, we do not see them as they are. We see them as what we unconsciously desired from our caregivers. Another important concept in object relations theory is the whole object relations, which refers to seeing a person as they truly are, with both their strengths and their flaws. When we have the ability for whole object relations, meaning we see people as integrated, their positive qualities and their negative qualities, we can experience them as they truly are. But when someone lacks this ability, which is the person who is experiencing limerence, they tend to split the view of the LO, and they see them either as good or all bad, depending on the moment. This ties into limerence because the limerent experience of fantasy is idealizing this person, seeing them as a perceived perfection of love. The idealization creates a fantasy world where it feels safer and perhaps more satisfying than the complexities and the flaws of real relationships. And this hurts both the person who is limerent and the LO. Fantasy, like all other coping mechanisms, protect us from our pain of unnamed longings. It gives us a false sense of control and a mastery over our lives. You experience the shadow side of fantasy when the limerence starts to fade, when you start to experience the withdrawals. You're left with the regret of how much time had passed when you were playing stories in your head. This is a repetitious manifestation of being disconnected from yourself and from others. Worse yet, you wake up to the real-world consequences that comes with limerence. In limerence and in fantasy, there's often a sense of grandiosity, where someone feels as though the rules don't apply to them. In scenarios like cheating, which is unfortunately far too common in limerence, they might idealize this affair partner and believe that their connection is so special that the usual consequences don't apply to them, that betrayal and being caught won't follow. This inflated sense of self leads to risky behaviors and ignoring the people that get hurt in the process. If you want to have meaningful relationships, you have to confront the whole of reality. Escaping into limerent fantasies does not allow you to know what a true relationship is like. You can't really have love without fear, and you can't really live without suffering. Thank you guys for watching. I really am excited to talk more on limerence and share with you guys some of the latest research. Please write in the comments if there's any questions you have on this topic or any personal insights that has helped you recover from person addiction. Again, thank you so much. I will catch you guys next time.